The ANC and SACP are experiencing a severe historic rift as the SACP plans to contest the 2026 local government elections independently. This tension has been brewing since the early 1990s. After years of threatening such a move, the SACP has finally taken the decision following the 2024 general elections, where the ANC lost its majority at the vote. This is also meant to test the SACP's ability to influence or secure positions in the national executive and provincial executives. I would describe this as a hoi polloi moment in the South African body politic, where both parties expect ordinary citizens like you, me, and her to follow them in their numbers. The question now is, do both parties have a big surprise waiting for them as we head towards the outcome of the municipal polls? My name is Hajra Omarjee from Business Day, and joining me in studio is Lizeka Tandwa, TimesLIVE digital politics editor. Welcome to the political arena. Lizeka, the ANC is spending a lot of time talking about the SACP. We have 500 parties in the body politic in South Africa. Will the SACP just be another one, or can we expect them to do as well as the UDM, COPE, and MK in the elections?
Well, even the General Secretary of the SACP has kind of said it, right, that he is not expecting huge successes in this election. In fact, he's called it a tactical move, not a strategic one, as the SACP. I think whether this is a test for this is more of a test for the SACP to kind of figure out how, when they go into 2029, do they approach those elections? It's kind of a litmus test for them.
So are we seeing the leftist political parties, your Workers' Party led by NUMSA, your EFF led by Julius Malema, your SACP led by Solly, kind of coalescing, which could see a different bloc compete for elections going forward?
I think the more important question, because if you look at it historically, you've mentioned your NUMSAs, you've mentioned the EFF, which seems to be plateauing at this moment, is can they actually get the results in the polls, whether they coalesce together or not? Is there still space for leftist parties? I'm not sure.
So I'm not convinced that they are left parties, though. They're left in terms of policy, but they're opportunistic in terms of everything else.
Well, that's politics, right? That's politics. Everyone is opportunistic. Policies, I think you can say that they lean towards the left, but I'm very uncertain and quite apprehensive about whether all these parties, which have men who have big egos, can actually coalesce together.
And that's probably why we haven't seen Action SA, Bosa, Rise Mzansi, and the Good Party, which is led by a woman tradition. Yeah, but I mean, someone has to be leader, someone has to be SG. And it's also mentioning these small parties have not gone to a elective conference.
Exactly. And it's always been ego-driven, because right now, what was it, Unite for Change, I believe, where Good Party
they tried to,
and at the end
they'll work together after.
At the end, it seemed that no one could agree on who's actually going to be leading this. Musi Maimane he believed that he could lead this. Patricia de Lille, who also has like a huge resume in politics, could not believe that she would be led by this man.
Let's go back to the vanguard, or when we were coming up as young political reporters described as the vanguard, the SACP that would provide theoretical and ideological direction to the tripartite alliance. It was at their 2008 special conference, if I'm not mistaken, that they said the EFF were demigods, they were corruption, and the ANC should have no association with the likes of the EFF once they were formed in earlier iterations, Julius Malema. What's happened to that? Because they now want to go with the EFF because they say it's a black party.
It's a black party, but there's also opportunity there. I mean, the SACP doesn't really have funding at this point. It has had to cancel some of its programs even this year because of the funding situation. But also, I mean, the SACP has been reliant, and I don't think that they quite grasp how hard it is to actually campaign. All that has to do with
everyone wants to be president.
Everyone, and Julius has kind of said it so many times, you know.
So I think everyone wants to be ANC president or Julius Malema.
Yes. But the reality is that it takes quite a lot of resource, which the SACP has had to depend on the ANC for. It's always leaned on the ANC. It's always been cushioned by the ANC. And going at it alone, I think it realizes it's going to be more than what they expected.
So we're spilling the tea in political arena. That's what this platform is for. Let's look at election funding, right? A lot of it is not declared, but we do know the Chinese Communist Party, certain other parties in African countries do have historically funded the ANC. Can we expect that funding to shift to the SACP, or is it too early days for someone to hedge on them?
You know what? There was a lot of talk, alleged, we'll use alleged a lot in this segment.
We're spilling the tea, guys.
Because allegedly the Russians had something to do with the MK party in terms of funding, which is why we're seeing now this whole scandal around the soldiers or the would-be soldiers, men who have been taken to Russia to fight for the Russians in the Russia-Ukraine war. And if the Russians did actually fund the MK party, the result is not what they expected.
But also West African countries, after Jacob Zuma delivered that speech at Orlando Stadium, saying that Africa needs to belong to Africans. He resonated with
and how he
African countries.
How he went to Morocco and all of a sudden changed from a man who believed, in the sovereignty of Western Sahara, and all of a sudden he is, this man who obviously tells you a lot about
and the SACP
funding.
is housed at Kusatu House, so they don't pay their own rent.
Yes.
Do you think they are positioning themselves because they want a communist or socialist country? Do you think that ambition is a genuine ambition, or is it just about positions in the cabinet at national level and in provincial executives?
What have we seen with the SACP in the past couple of years? What has been their biggest complaint is that they do not have influence in terms of the economic policy in government. It's the fact that their members tend to be cast aside when it comes to picking who goes to the legislature, council, and cabinet, the executive. That's been the two primal complaints, concerns, frustrations from them.
But if
it hasn't really been about turning this country into a socialist country. It's been about, for me, from what I've been hearing, it has always been about the
economic policy and positions. However, if you look at South Africa's government at national level, there's a lot of social welfare. There is a lot of left-leaning policies. We have arguably the most progressive labor laws in the world, even though there's now pushback against it within the government of national unity between the ANC and the DA. But historically, right, the ANC president, be it Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma, or Cyril Ramaphosa, decided on who he wanted in his cabinet, consulted the alliance, and then made the announcement. They were excluded. The SACP was excluded from this consultation in 2024.
You know what? I asked Soli Mapaila, who's the General Secretary, this question. We once had an off the record as journalists. We sat down with him and some within the leadership, and I asked him that historically, the ANC president and the SACP General Secretary have had a relationship where, for instance, with Mandela and Thabo Mbeki, your Charles Ngagulas, your Kotanas, and even Blade Zimande, Jacob Zuma, there's been that close relationship where they could rely on each other. Where they could, the president of the ANC knew to go to that man. That relationship, we haven't seen that relationship between President Cyril Ramaphosa and Solly Mapaila, and perhaps that's part of the problem, is that President Cyril Ramaphosa does not feel that Solly Mapaila is the man that he can go to kind of, get some sober realities, get some advice
from the
vanguard. I think that's one of the reasons is there has been that fracture between the two leaders, and obviously that's going to translate as they go along.
But we saw the same thing in the midst of the Zuma tsunami, where this was exactly the complaint of the SACP and COSATU, and then
in the latter years.
But before 2007, when Zuma was elected, and then you had the SACP and COSATU complain. You then had the SACP and COSATU in the national executive, and they went quiet until they were about to be ousted again.
But the reality is, in as much as we can say a lot about the SACP, the ANC is not without blame. It's not without blemish as well.
I think they had the last time they had a tripartite alliance summit was in 20.
Solly has been complaining about how long it's been. Even the secretariat, they hardly meet. And his complaints, I think, are justified. He's complained about whether they agree with it or not. Nomvula Mokonyane, the second deputy, said, in fact, that they had discussed the outcomes of the election. They had made a diagnostic report, which I don't remember. I don't remember them having, as a tripartite alliance, having that diagnostic report. And I'm sure we would know about it, you and I.
But I do think they felt excluded as the ANC and the DA set up the
government of national unity. And I think that's one of the reasons which have turned off the vanguard movement, which has turned off the SACP, is that they haven't been able to be given that chair in the table. But
however, if you look at what the SACP brings to the table, I would argue that there's been a worker stay away, and that's why the ANC's lost mass support in successive elections. But the ANC has also, the SACP has also struggled to get its leaders onto the national executive of the ANC over the last two conferences. So why would the ANC reward the SACP in terms of cabinet posts and provincial executive posts when it's not bringing any votes to the table?
The relationship is so historic, and we know the ANC is very sentimental, right? And it has, and I would disagree with the view that the ANC hasn't rewarded the SACP. The Deputy Finance Minister,
David Masondo, Buti Manamela, Gwede Mantashe.
Yes, and even in legislatures, in all the provinces, you have
Jacob Mamabolo and Gauteng.
You have a representation of the SACP, and it's not portfolios that people would deem as immaterial or junior. It's very, very, very powerful portfolios, and I sincerely doubt that you could say that the ANC hasn't been.
But do the SACP deserve it? Have they brought votes to the table? I guess this election is going to tell the story.
Which is quite interesting because, Tando, our colleague at Business Day, actually asked this question of Mbalula, and he could not even respond to it. What she wanted to know is, in terms of, can you quantify it? How many of your votes come from the SACP? That tells you a lot even about the ANC. In fact, this diagnostic report, they don't reflect on their elections.
All right, Lizeka, we'll discuss the worker vote, because I think that is what both the ANC and the SACP are coveting. Those are COSATU unions, workers in general, the black middle class, as well as the black working class. But I think it's a good moment for us to pause and reflect as we prepare our hot takes on the ANC and SACP. So we've reflected on the past. Now let's look at what's likely to unfold. Lizeka, so in this election, should the SACP not get 8% or 7%, like COPE and the EFF did in their first election? Should it not get close to where MK got in the last election? Do you think it will go back into the fold of the ANC?
I think the ANC has said that there's consequences for this decision, but it hasn't really stated what those consequences are. What will happen if the SACP does take even a fraction of the ANC's vote it does have a huge implications for the ANC, which has been hemorrhaging votes. So I don't see how these two allies can come back together when the ANC, because the SACP will take from the ANC.
Yeah, but we are moving away from a phase of alliance politics, and we are moving towards coalition politics. So the only way the SACP has a seat or has a say or voice in coalition politics is if they bring physical numbers in terms of the vote. And if it's 15%, then they might have a big say. If it's 3 or 4%, which I think is more likely, then they're not going to have much of a say unless the ANC just needs that small vote to get across and get a majority in metros.
Well, then I think it goes without saying if the ANC, for instance, in Johannesburg needs 2 seats to vote for Dada Morero to become mayor, they will obviously instinctually go to the SACP first before anyone else, before the DA or anyone else. That goes without saying.
Yeah.
But whether this alliance remains as is going forward, whether the ANC, President Cyril Ramaphosa, when he makes his reshuffle, which we've all been anticipating because it's been over a year now, and what tends to happen is that the president does make a reshuffle after a year or so. Whether that happens and then he goes and consults the SACP as per usual is something I think that remains to be seen. I don't think that that can happen in the way that it necessarily has been, because this resolution by the 5th Congress of the Special Congress of the SACP in 2024, at the end of 2024, was not only about this this campaign, this election. It talks to elections going forward.
Yeah, so speaking to that, NUMSA General Secretary Ivan Jim has been trying to facilitate discussions between the SACP as well as MK. Would you go as far as to call that a doomsday coalition? Or is that just the DA's phrase?
I'm not going to use the DA's phrasing. I don't particularly, myself personally, I don't particularly think that a party that had 17% in the votes, I don't think that those 17%, that constituency, those people were necessarily dumb or whatever to vote for the MK party. It would be strange. It would be flip-flopping, though, for Solly Mapaila, who was quite vocal about and scathing about Jacob Zuma when he was still at the ANC, with the ANC, to kind of now come to bed, be in bed with the MK party, especially given that there's a rift between the SACP and the ANC. That would kind of nullify, completely kill that alliance.
500 political parties contesting the municipal elections. You have the Workers' Party, the SACP, MK, EFF. They consider themselves left black parties. We could do an introspection of that and say they're more opportunistic. But don't you think they need to come together and stop fracturing the vote of the so-called left?
They fractured the vote by themselves being that many parties. I mean, the vote is fractured. I'm not sure whether they can actually come together. I'm not sure whether they would be able to come together, because we are talking about the egos. We are talking about politics, careerism here. It will be interesting for me what the SACP does after this election. It will be also interesting to see what happens with those who are in cabinet, what happens with those who are in the legislatures and in council, whether they still consider themselves ANC and go into the ANC list. And remember, we don't even have the list.
Yes, we don't have the... Why is the ANC spending so much of their time talking about the SACP when this has been coming for 30 years, instead of focusing on their candidate lists for elections?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
I have a theory. It's to create crisis so that the opportunists can force themselves onto the list.
So then what happens then? The ANC is still the biggest loser. The ANC is likely going to lose. And I think that's been the problem with the ANC. It's not forward thinking. Yeah. It has really failed.
Look, we've dealt with slates. We don't have slates, but we still have factions.
Yes.
And we still have people campaigning for ANC president. And this is their way to get there.
And that's all they care about.
Yeah.
Most of them.
Well, let's talk about what Solly Mapaila cares about. He's the SACP General Secretary. If Jacob Zuma could be expelled from the ANC as a previous president of the ANC, Can we expect Solly to be expelled as well after elections?
Why not? I mean, it would be Solly Mapaila, what he has done or what the SACP is doing is completely against the constitution of the ANC. And the ANC will have to answer for that, or the NEC, or the top 7 rather, would have to answer to that, to
but
its
Cyril
members.
Ramaphosa, or whoever the next ANC president is, will also want to be cautious.
Yeah, because that's the last thing you want, is for the tripartite alliance.
EFF,
exactly.
MK, and then a split.
So then what do you do? What do you do? You have this SACP, which
we never said these questions were easy to answer.
Because, I mean, his legacy hasn't really been, I mean, as Cyril wanted this presidency, we know, for a long time. And he really has, it has been a poison chalice for him. He's lost elections one after another. He's had to bring in the DA, their enemy, into the fold in terms of government. And if now the tripartite alliance ends in his term, it would really, it wouldn't bode well for him. It wouldn't look well for him in terms of his legacy. And I think that that's what he wants. He wants to have a legacy of having either in terms of the state, you know, a recovery, and in terms of the ANC, the unity and renewal of the ANC. And I don't see that happening. I mean, if you look at, for instance, just to pivot now, go to what Blade Nzimande, you remember that discussion document he penned around October, November last year, kind of told you how split the SACP is on this decision.
Because the likes of Gwede Mantashe, who was in the SACP top brass and got kicked out, wants to still keep his cabinet post. Yeah.
And they all do. I mean, I don't imagine that Blade does. You know, Blade is very comfortable where he is. I think Butimana Mela and Yuma Sondos, even though they don't say it publicly like Blade did. But the reality is, I don't think that those individuals believe in this resolution by the SACP.
All right.
And that's going to create more problems for Solly going forward.
Absolutely. You would think Solly Mapaila would have been ready to be SG and had a firm framework or roadmap of the way forward. But the SACP, the ANC, and everyone else seems to be making it up as they go along. I do want to pivot slightly away from the SACP to Palapala. We're expecting the Constitutional Court judgment onto whether or not Ramaphosa should be impeached. We have not seen a challenge from Ramaphosa yet in terms of his review application of Sandile Nkobo's parliamentary finding. What do you think the way forward is? And is there an existential threat that we may see calls for Ramaphosa to step aside?
What exactly did the EFF go to the Constitutional Court for, right? They went there to hold in fact, it was Parliament. They wanted the Constitutional Court to find that Parliament had not done its duty in holding the President Cyril Ramaphosa accountable in terms of that report by Judge Sandile.
Sandile Nkobo.
And what do we know about our president? You remember when that report came out, what happened? He was ready to sign his resignation letter and leave. I don't think that he would necessarily act in the same way, that impulsive way again, but I do think that it surprises me that he hasn't reviewed that report as yet.
So he did apply to the Concourt for a review, and he was told to go to the lower courts, but he didn't take it on review at the lower courts. And I also think he has not taken the nation or Parliament into confidence on the issue of Palapala.
But also, I mean, when it comes to that report, if you speak to some people who do have law degrees, some people who have really looked at and looked at that report, they will say, there's discrepancies there in that report.
So that's why he should have challenged it in the lower courts, because it's not Thuli Madonsela's Nkandla report as the public protector.
The remedial actions are not binding.
But there are calls to follow the Zuma script to try to get Ramaphosa out. trying to compare Nkandla to Phala-Phala?
This will always be Ramaphosa's Achilles heel, right? The Phala-Phala report. It will follow him, and I think even after his presidency.
But Phala-Phala was not state money.
No.
It happened at the start of COVID, which is perhaps the president's argument for why he didn't declare it in time. And there was a public protector report that was not reviewed or struck down on Nkandla, and massive corruption with regard to state spending. Is there an equivalent, or is it a proxy battle to get Ramaphosa out?
I'm not sure about it being, there's an equivalent, but I think if the president had answers, which is what Judge Sandile said, that he had a lot to answer to, he has not done that. He continues not to do that. He has never taken the country into his confidence, and that's a big problem.
So he does need to take the country into confidence. He needs to review Sandile and Ngobo's parliamentary report, but we don't know if it rises to the level of impeachment.
Well, no.
Well, that's our take. Let's wait for the Constitutional Court. Lizeka Tandwa there, my colleague from the Sunday Times. As you can hear, the ANC and SACP relationship is about to be put to the test, from a long-standing alliance to tensions around political identity, electoral strategy, and the future of the tripartite alliance. As always, no political formation escapes scrutiny here on the political arena. Just as we've unpacked the ANC and SACP, we'll be turning the same lens on other parties and alliances, perhaps Phala-Phala, in the weeks ahead. Thank you for tuning in. From me, Hajra Omarjee, and my colleague again, Lizeka Tandwa, it's goodbye for now.